C.S. Lewis, Letters to Malcolm, chiefly on prayer. Chapter 2. I can't understand why you say that my view of church services is man-centred and too concerned with mere edification. How does this follow from anything I said? Actually, my ideas about the sacrament would probably be called magical by a good many modern theologians. Surely the more fully one believes that a strictly supernatural event takes place, the less one can attach any great importance to the dress, gestures and position of the priest. I agree with you that he is there, not only to edify the people, but to glorify God. But how can a man glorify God by placing obstacles in the way of people, especially if the slightest element of clerical one-upmanship, I owe the phrase to a cleric, underlines some of his eccentricities? How right is that passage in The Imitation, where the celebrant is told, "Consult not your own devotion, but the edification of your flock." I've forgotten how the Latin runs. Now, about the Rose Macaulay letters. Like you, I was staggered by this continual search for more and more prayers. If she were merely collecting them as objects d'art, I could understand it. She was a born collector. But I get the impression that she collected them in order to use them, that her whole prayer life depended on what we may call ready-made prayers written by other people. But though, like you, staggered, I was not, like you, repelled. One reason is that I had, and you hadn't, the luck to meet her. Make no mistake, she was the right sort, one of the most fully civilised people I ever knew. The other reason, as I have so often told you, is that you are a bigot. Broaden your mind. Malcolm, broaden your mind. It takes all sorts to make a world, or a church. This may be even truer of a church. If grace perfects nature, it must expand all our natures into the full richness of the diversity which God intended when he made them, and heaven will display far more variety than hell. One full doesn't mean one pool. Cultivated roses and daffodils are no more alike than wild roses and daffodils. What pleased me most about a Greek Orthodox Mass I once attended was that there seemed to be no prescribed behaviour for the congregation. Some stood, some knelt, some sat, some walked, one crawled about the floor like a caterpillar, and the beauty of it was that nobody took the slightest notice of what anyone else was doing. I wish we Anglicans would follow their example. One meets people who are perturbed because someone in the next pew does or does not cross himself. They oughtn't even to have seen, let alone censured. Who art thou that judges another servant? I don't doubt, then, that Rose Macaulay's method was the right one for her. It wouldn't be for me any more than for you. All the same, I'm not quite such a purist in this matter as I used to be. For many years after my conversion, I never used any ready forms except the Lord's Prayer. In fact, I tried to pray without words at all, not to verbalise the mental acts. If in praying for others I believed I tended to avoid their names and substituted mental images of them, I still think the prayer without words is best, if one really can achieve it. But I now see that, in trying to make it my daily bread, I was counting on a greater mental and spiritual strength than I really had. I really have. To pray successfully without words, one needs to be at the top of one's form, otherwise the mental acts become merely imaginative or emotional acts. And a fabricated emotion is a miserable affair when the golden moments come, when God enables one really to pray without words. Who but a fool would reject the gift? But he does not give it, anyway, not to me, day in, day out. My mistake was Pascal, if I remember rightly, calls error of stoicism, thinking we can do always what we can do sometimes. And this, you see, makes the choice between ready-made prayers and one's own rather less important for me than it apparently is for you. For me, words are in any case secondary. They are only an anchor, or shall I say, they are the movements of the conductor's baton, not the music. They serve to canalise the worship or penitence or petition, which might without them. Such are our minds, spread into wide and shallow puddles. It does not matter very much who first put them together. If they are our own words, they will soon, by unavoidable repetition, harden into formula. If they are someone else's, we shall continually pour into them our own meaning. At present, for one's practice changes, and I think ought to change, I find it best to make my own words the staple, but introduce a modicum of the ready-made. Writing to you, I need not stress the importance of the homemade staple, as Solomon said in the dedication of the temple. Each man who prays knows the plague of his own heart, also the comforts of his own heart. No other creature is identical with me, no other situation identical with mine. Indeed, I myself and my situation are in continual change. A ready-made form can't serve for my intercourse with God any more than it could serve my intercourse with you. This is obvious, perhaps. I shan't find it so easy to persuade you that the ready-made modicum has all its use. For me, I mean, I'm not suggesting rules for anyone else in the whole world. First, it keeps me in touch with sound doctrine. Left to oneself, one could easily slide away from the faith once given into a phantom called my religion. Secondly, it reminds me what things I ought to ask, perhaps especially when I'm praying for other people. The crisis of the present moment, like the nearest telegraph post, will always loom largest. Isn't there a danger that our great permanent objective necessities, often more important, may get crowded out? By the way, that's another thing to be avoided in the revised prayer book. Contemporary problems may claim an undue share, and the more up-to-date the book is, the sooner it will be dated. Finally, they provide an element of the ceremonial. On your view, that is just what we don't want. On mine, it is part of what we want. I see what you mean when you say that using ready-made prayers would become like making love to your own wife out of Petrarch or Donne. Incidentally, might you not quote them to such a literary wife as Betty? The parallel won't do. I fully agree that the relationship with God and a man is more private and intimate than any possible relation between two fellow creatures, yes, but at the same time there is, in another way, a great distance between the participants. We're approaching, well, I won't say the holy other, but I suspect that is meaningless, but the unimaginably and unsupportably other. We ought to be sometimes, I hope one is, simultaneously aware of the closest proximity and infinite distance. You make things far too snug and confiding. Your erotic analogy needs to be supplemented by I fell at his feet as one dead. I think the low church milieu that I grew up in did tend to be too cosily at ease in Sion. My grandfather, I'm told, used to say that he looked forward to having some very interesting conversations with St. Paul when he got to heaven. Two clerical gentlemen talking at ease in a club. It never seemed to cross his mind that an encounter with St. Paul might be rather an overwhelming experience, even for the evangelical clergyman of good family. But when Dante saw the great apostles in heaven, they affected him like mountains. There's a lot to be said against devotions to saints, but at least they keep on reminding us that we are very small people compared with them. How much smaller before their master? A few formal ready-made prayers serve me as a corrective of, well, let's call it cheek. They keep one side of the paradox alive. Of course, it is only one side. It would be better not to be reverent at all than have a reverence which denied the proximity.